So awesome. All right, so career exploration. Wanted to make note here that a lot of this information that we're going to be going over today is adapted from a book called The New Rules of Work. This is a wonderful book. We've definitely used this a lot in our office when providing advice to students or in helping to develop workshops for you guys. So this is definitely a book we highly recommend for you to take a look at. It's a pretty quick, easy read. I know sometimes nonfiction, career exploration stuff isn't necessarily the most exciting thing to read about, but I will say for the content of the book, this is a pretty easy format and very easy to follow in a quick read. So definitely recommend you to check this out. And the first thing we want to talk about here is just kind of how your career path is formed. There's definitely a lot of different things that kind of can affect or impact your career path and where types of jobs you end up in and where you eventually will go in the future. So some of those things include your core values. So what's just important to you as a person? What do you value? What do you want to contribute or give back? Along with your education, right? There's certain jobs that you need a college degree for or that you need a master's degree for. So obviously the level of education that you have is certainly going to affect your career path as well. Your personal interests, just what are you interested in? Definitely, you know, if it's something that if you're pursuing a career path, for example, because a professor thinks you'd be great at it, or it's something that your family has always wanted you to do, but you're not really that interested in it, chances are you won't be as invested in that career. So your personal interests are definitely something that are going to really play a big part in the career path you take, as well as your innate talents and your strengths. So your innate talents, just what are things that you're good at naturally that you've never necessarily had to work at per se. They're just things that you're naturally good at, as well as your strengths, which maybe are skills that you've gained and that you've built, even if it wasn't something that you had naturally. It was just things that you were able to develop along the way throughout your career or throughout your education. So all of these different things are going to affect your career path. In this book, they talk about how we are in charge of our own path. So with that comes a couple different things, right? Feeling like we're actually in charge of our own career path and that we have control over that. There's a lot of freedom and possibility that can be pretty exciting, right? To know that we can pick what we want to do. We can choose what we want to do and pick that direction we want to go down. On the flip side of that, there's also a lot of stress and pressure that can come along with that as well, because you do have to make that decision and you do have to decide for yourself what route you want to go down. And that is something that can be very stressful and cause a lot of pressure. So there's a few tips here that we want to keep in mind as we go through this information. One thing is that you want to try to plan in smaller steps. They recommend trying to plan in more of a 2 to 5 year chunk of time, not thinking about your whole life. And I think this happens a lot throughout our lives, from when we're kids, going into high school and college. We kind of sometimes get this message from society that we have to have our whole life career plan paved out and planned out. And that's just not necessarily always the most realistic thing to do. So as we're keeping these different tips in mind that we're going to be talking about in this presentation, keep that in mind. You want to try to think in smaller steps. So keeping that 2 to 5 year time span in mind. Another really important thing to keep in mind is that we learn what we like as we go. Learning a subject in school isn't the same as actually doing it. So there can be a class that you really, really enjoy in college and you think, wow, this is something that I think I want to further pursue this and have a career in this. And then you might actually get in a job that's related to that subject and it's not really all that you thought it was going to be. And maybe you don't really like that job as much as you thought you were going to. And it's because sometimes we really do have to learn what we like as we go. Just because we learn or enjoy learning about something doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to enjoy doing it or having a career in that area. So keep that in mind as well. And also really making sure that we're focusing on the right job for you right now. Again, what's right for you right now might not be the same career or the same job that's right for you in 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 15 years from now. But we really want to put that focus on the right here, right now, again, so you're not feeling like you're having to have that whole life plan already kind of carved out for yourself. So there's 3 R's that we're going to talk about throughout this presentation. The first R is reflect, the second one is research, and the third one is refine. So first, we're going to reflect. And this comes down to talking about what you value. Again, not what your parents value, not what your friends value, or your professors or society, but what do you actually value? This is your career. You're going to be the one in it. So you want to make sure that it's a good match for your own individual values. To kind of help you figure out what your values are, think about from jobs that you've had, volunteer work you've done, projects that you've done in school, what in your work has given you meaning and purpose? What has kind of driven you or given you that motivation? A lot of times finding a job that honors your values actually tends to be more important than the type of work you are doing itself. So there have been studies out there that show people who find work or pursue work that matches their values tend to be more satisfied and successful in their career. So it's not necessarily always about the specific job that you're doing, but it's if that job honors and is a good match for your individual values. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how to carve that out. I think it's easy to say, what do you value, right? But that's such a huge question. How do we kind of narrow that down and rein that down a little bit? So I'm going to actually get out of our presentation for a moment here and share with you another link. And this is actually one of the links that I put in the chat box, like I mentioned when we started. Okay, just having a hard time getting my Zoom information here. So just bear with me while I try to pull this up. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now on your screen, you should see a document that says, who are you now? So again, this link is in the chat box. I definitely recommend for you to copy and paste that into your browser, bookmark it, so that you have this to refer back to as you're kind of doing some work on your own after this presentation. So we're going to scroll down. Again, this is definitely a good read. This is actually where the authors kind of talk about how they were in jobs where they thought, oh, this is what we want to do. And then they got in them and figured out, oh, no, this isn't really what we thought it was going to be. This isn't what we want to do. So it's talking about their stories here. But if we scroll down a little bit here, we're going to look at the values. So they have different categories of values here. And what you want to do is rank the values from 1 through 4. So if you give something a 1, it's a value that is absolutely essential for you to have within a job. If you give it a 2, it's desirable but not essential. 3, it's neutral, so it's not really that important or unimportant to you. Or if you give it a 4, it's going to be something that's not of value to you, and it's something that you would actually prefer to avoid in a job, okay? So again, this is something that you're going to want to take some more time to do on your own after the presentation, but I just want to show you this chart because this is something that we're going to use and refer back to with some other exercises that we're going to talk about. So you can see the different categories of values here. Mission and impact, so social change, I want to make a contribution to society at large. Social interaction, collaboration, and teamwork. Is working on a team something that's really important to you? Is that something that you value and that you want to see within your career? or do you prefer kind of working more by yourself or independently? Obviously, you're going to give that a 1 through a 4, dependent on how important that is to you. Some of the other categories they have here are routine. So are you somebody who likes deadlines? Do you want flexibility? Do you want to be able to travel regularly for your job? Reward, are you somebody who wants that public acknowledgement for what you're doing? Compensation, do you want your job to have significant financial reward? And then challenge and expression. So do you want to be able to take risks within your job? Do you want to have physical engagement in your job? So not just something where you're sitting behind a desk all day, but something where you're going to be able to kind of be more out and about. These are the types of things that we want to think about in defining our values and figuring out what's really important to you. So what you want to do after you do this exercise is take all the values that you've ranked as number 1, and you're just going to put them on this list right here, okay? So you want to try to have maybe 3 to 4 things that you're ranking as number 1. Again, you don't want to have too many because that's going to make some of our further research that we're going to do down the line a little bit more complicated. So you really want to try to stick with those top values that are of most important to you, okay? All right, I'm going to go back to our presentation. Okay. One last thing about that I did want to mention is that your values can change, and that's okay. So keep that in mind too. If somebody who's doing this exercise right now who's in college versus somebody who is doing this exercise 10 years out, their values might be different because you might be at a different place in your life at that point. Somebody who is maybe single and doesn't have kids or doesn't have huge family ties to an area, they might have different values versus somebody who is married and maybe has children or has a mortgage and things like that. So your values can definitely change as you go through life, and keep that in mind that that's okay. Sometimes we think that's something that shouldn't be. Our values shouldn't change and that they should stay the same forever, but that's not realistic. As we grow and our life changes, our values often change as well. So definitely keep that in mind as you're doing this exercise too. Okay, so moving on to the second R. So R number 2 is research. So in R number 1, we're doing more of that work and kind of defining what our values are. Now we want to get more on the research end of things. So first we want to talk about how important it is to do that research. So really, you can't be clear on what you want if you don't know what a job entails. So that's really part of why it's so important to do this research as you're doing this career exploration. You want to figure out if potential careers that you're interested in match up or line up with your values and what's important to you. Keep in mind too that your values might shift as you do this research. So something when you're kind of filling out that chart that we just went over or ranking the different values, what's important to you right now, that might change a little bit as you're doing research. You might be doing that research and finding like, oh, you know, this is something that I really thought was important to me, but maybe it's not. I think that the teamwork aspect is more important to me instead. So keep that in mind too, that your values might shift as you do that research, and that's okay. Research takes time. You don't want to just feel like you're on Google for 5 minutes and that's it. It is something that's going to be a little bit more involved, a lot more time consuming. This isn't something that you just want to rush through, okay? So keep that in mind. This isn't just like an exercise that you kind of do 5 minutes later, you're done with it and you move on. This is kind of this ongoing process, things that you're going to really want to reflect on and refer back to. So make sure that you're not just kind of rushing through this phase. You also want to make sure that you're doing research, even if you think you know what you want to do. So again, like I mentioned before, learning about a subject in school is very different than actually doing it. So you really want to make sure that even if you think you have a pretty solid idea of where you want to go in your career or what you want to do after you graduate, you definitely want to still kind of put some time and effort into this research phase just to make sure that after you do that research, that's still what you feel that you want to do. So it's either going to kind of solidify that for yourself or maybe make you take a step back and say, oh, maybe this isn't what I thought it was, and I think I want to research a different career path instead. Okay, so then we also want to talk about passion versus profession. And I have a quote here from the book because I just thought they put this in a way that I just couldn't say better myself. So I put this quote here that we can talk about a little bit. Finding your passion isn't just about looking at what you love doing. It's about assessing what your values are and aligning your career wants with what will practically bring you fulfillment and purpose in your day-to-day. I think this is so important because I think, again, we kind of get this message from society, not only that we need to have our whole lives planned out for ourselves, but have you ever heard that expression or people tell you, just do what you love, follow your heart, just do what you love and the rest will fall into place. And I definitely can understand and value that advice. However, there's a difference between professional passions and hobbies. And I have the example here. You can love to cook, but not pursue being a chef. I'm somebody who loves to dance, but I never pursued becoming a professional dancer. I just knew that it was something that was more of a hobby for myself. No matter how much I loved it, I didn't see myself actually pursuing that as a career. So really keep that in mind. Of course, you want to do something that you love and that you enjoy, but sometimes there can be a difference between what you love to do as a hobby and what you actually love or will love to do in the workplace. So when we're kind of thinking about that, again, think back to jobs that you've had or projects that you've done for school or volunteer work that you've done, and think about what activities at work were the most exciting to you, okay? That's something that's going to help you find and kind of define more of that professional passion versus just something that you enjoy doing in your free time. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of the other links that I left in the chat box for you. There's the functions and industries page, and there's also our Muse Grid. So the purpose behind the Muse Grid is to learn about different aspects of a field or industry that are the most important to you. So with that being said, again, I'm going to get out of our presentation here for a moment, and I'm going to go back to another link to share with you. Okay. So here, excuse me, is the functions and industries checklist. So this basically just lists in this column or this section of the page here, different functions. So academics, business and strategy, education, finance and accounting, just different functions that can fall within a job, as well as some different industries. So advertising, finance, healthcare, journalism. What you want to do is basically check off the functions or industries that are most interesting to you, things that you would like to further explore a little bit more and find out more about to see how well they match with your values, okay? So again, this link to this is in the chat box. So again, bookmark this, print it out, do whatever you need to do to make sure that you have access to it after the fact, after the presentation. And what you want to try to do is come up with 7 different functions and industries approximately that, again, you want to do a little bit more research on. So you can check those boxes. If there's any industries on there, of course, this isn't going to be a completely exhaustive list of every industry that's out there. So if there's something that you're interested that just isn't on this list, feel free to add it. That's completely fine. You don't just have to stick with what's on here. And then you just kind of want to rank your top 7 here that you want to do further research on. Okay, and now we're going to talk about the Muse Grid. The reason why this is called the Muse Grid, again, I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the authors of this book are the founders of themuse.com, which is definitely a site I recommend for everybody to take a look at as well. They have a lot of great career, job search advice, lots of different articles and resources. So I certainly recommend for you to check that out. But what you want to do in your Muse Grid is, after you kind of narrow down those 3 values or so and those 7 functions or industries, you would just put the values up here in this top column or top row here. And then you're going to list the functions and industries that are of interest to you here on the left-hand side. So the goal of what you're going to be doing in the next phase of this research is seeing how well does this function or industry match with your top values. So that's what the research that you want to do, is to see how well those are a good match for, or would those be able to honor those values that are of importance to you. And as you go through, of course, you're going to be jotting down notes and writing things that kind of help answer those questions for you, okay? So this is the Muse Grid. Again, this is something that you want to print, bookmark, whatever is going to work for you so that you have access to it. Again, refer to the chat box if you need the link there. All right, back to our presentation. Okay. Oops. Okay. So as we're starting, we have this, we have our values identified, we have some functions and industries identified, and now we have this Muse Grid, and now we want to actually fill it out. So how do we actually do that research in order to fill it out? The first step is to look at different industry, company, or brand websites. So things that companies that fall under those different functions or industries that you're interested in researching. If you need help with even identifying companies that are out there that fall under those industries, of course, Google is our best friend. We can do a Google search. We can look at different best companies lists that are out there. So you might see, the 10 best companies to work for in the hotel industry or the IT industry or whatever. Check out those best companies lists, as well as looking at different industry sites. And again, if you need help with finding some of that, I definitely recommend just doing a basic Google search, or if you're still kind of struggling or need additional pointers, you can always contact our office for assistance as well. We can kind of talk about additional ideas on how to find some of this information. So what you want to do is, after you've identified some companies, is to pick a few and then spend maybe 10 minutes or so on each company website. And again, the whole point of why we're doing this is to find clues on how each function or industry matches the values that you also have written on your Muse Grid. So really try to focus on what types of services are they providing, looking at some of their job postings, or what their requirements are for employees, or what are the backgrounds of their top employees. That can give you some information as to what the company values as well, and is therefore going to give you information as to how well it's going to be a match for your own personal values, okay? So do some of that research first. Look at the company websites, become a little bit more familiar with the industry or the companies that fall under those different functions on your list. You also want to research LinkedIn, and this is going to be something that's going to help you with the next step that we're going to talk about in the research phase. So look at some profiles of people you respect, or just people in general who are interesting to you, and take a look. What types of roles have they had? So not just their current role, but what were they doing before? That's going to be really important to show you maybe where you could potentially start to help kind of get you eventually up that career ladder. Is there anything else noteworthy that you're finding within their profile? So for example, are they focusing a lot on community involvement or volunteer work, or are there any other special skills that they have listed? Education, certifications, those types of things. Try to get that feel by looking at these different LinkedIn profiles. Within the book, the authors also promote looking at the People Also Viewed feature. So if you are on LinkedIn, and hopefully everyone on this presentation is at least familiar with it if you don't have a profile of your own at this point. But when you're on somebody's profile, on the right-hand side, there's also a list of other profiles that other people have also viewed after looking at this person's profile. So that can be helpful for you as well, to kind of browse through some of those profiles and get a better overall sense, again, of what are those people doing, or what types of roles have they had, or what other special skills do they have. Make sure that you're looking up any jargon that you may not know. You don't want to be doing all this research and then kind of stumble across certain terminology that you're just not familiar with. Make sure that you're looking that up, doing a Google search, trying to become more familiar with the terminology that's actually being used in the field, just to help give you a better overall understanding. And then you want to keep a list of people that you think might be helpful for you to talk to as you're doing some more research and exploring different career paths, okay? And that takes us to our next step in research here, the informational interview. This is something that our department talks about a lot. And I feel like in the majority of our presentations, we typically find one way or another to incorporate something about informational interviewing in there. So keep in mind, for those of you who might not be familiar with what exactly informational interviewing is, the purpose of an informational interview is to learn more about a company, career, or a job, okay? So it's different than a job interview where you are interviewing for a specific role and trying to see if the role is going to be a good fit for you, and the company is trying to determine if you're going to be a good fit for the role, okay? This is entirely different than a job interview. This is strictly to get more information from somebody who is in a job or in a field or industry that you yourself are interested in. So you can learn more from somebody who's already done the work and is in that career path, and ask that person those questions that you have, okay? Keep in mind that somebody that you are doing an informational interview with, if you reach out to them, they're going to be more likely to respond if you have a connection versus just somebody that, you know, you just don't have any kind of tie to. So LinkedIn is also really helpful with that, because you're able to see if the person is a second-degree connection, which would mean that you do both have a mutual connection. And again, if you do have additional questions about LinkedIn or want to become more familiar with that, that's something that you can definitely talk with our office about some more as well. When it comes to trying to find people to do informational interviews with, you want to try to find people who are maybe just one or two steps above where you want to be in your functions or industries of interest. So sometimes we think, oh, we want to go straight to the top. We want to only talk to the CEO of the company, right? It's not to say that that wouldn't be beneficial, but people who are just kind of one or two steps above where you could enter the field or where you want to be in your career, they're going to be able to provide you with more realistic and real life information, because they're just going to be a little bit more on your level and will most likely be more beneficial in providing more helpful information to you. When you are reaching out to somebody to inquire about doing an informational interview, it is recommended to send an email if possible versus sending a message through LinkedIn. You just don't know with LinkedIn how often people are checking their messages or when they log in and that sort of thing. So if you are able to get a direct email for the person, it's always best to contact them just directly versus email versus the LinkedIn message. Now, of course, when you are actually doing an informational interview, you want to make sure that you have a list of questions prepared ahead of time. So you don't want to just kind of go on the fly, but you want to make sure that you've really kind of put some thought into this and really thinking about what you want to ask the person that you are interviewing. So it could be questions about, you know, what's the best and worst part of your job? What are tips and advice you could offer somebody who is potentially looking to get into the field? How did you get your current position, or how did you get your foot in the door, or how did you find your first job? Those are the types of things that you can ask the person, again, because if they're in the industry, it's hearing it straight from the horse's mouth and people that have already had to kind of go through it. Make sure that throughout the informational interview that you're taking notes. It can kind of be a lot of information to go over at one time, so jot down some notes to help you remember what you're actually talking about. And stay in contact with the person. If this happens to be a person that you really connect with and they provide you a lot of great information and they seem like they want to continue to be able to help you in some way or maybe even link you to other people, make sure you're staying in contact with them. You don't want to just kind of have a one-time informational interview and then that's it. Now, again, as you're doing this interview, you want to try to keep your muse grid in mind. So really thinking about asking those questions where it's going to help show or address how your values match within that industry or if they match within that industry or function. So definitely keep that in mind as you're kind of coming up with your list of questions that you want to ask the person. Now, going back to our muse grid, again, you should be taking notes and kind of jotting things down within your grid as you're doing this research. And then what you want to do from there is add a high, medium, and low score to each box that's on your grid as to how well the function or industry matches up to each value that you have listed. Okay, so again, this is really about taking a realistic look at looking at what's important to you and how well those different functions or industries match up to that. Okay, so now we're kind of in the final phase of researching here. We want to narrow it down. So again, does each path line up with your values? Okay, based on this research that you've done. Is this something that you think you still really want to pursue as a career? So again, you've kind of done this research. Is this something that's still interesting to you now? Or if you've done this research and now you're kind of like, I'm glad that I learned this, but this isn't really motivating me. I don't want to learn any more about it. You really want to take a real, ask yourself those real questions because again, that's going to give you some insight as to whether or not it's truly going to be something that you want to further pursue or even further research or look for a job within that area. Also, are they realistic? You know, do the functions and values, how they match, are those different career paths realistic? So again, that's going to be based on your level of education and where you are right now, maybe financially. You really want to ask us, again, yourself those questions. Are these realistic career paths for me to pursue? And you want to try to get your list down to a maximum of 3 different career paths. And that doesn't mean that you can't look at other career paths in the future. This isn't kind of like the end-all be-all. You can't ever go back to it. But again, you don't want to have so many career paths that it just becomes too overwhelming and then you just don't do it, or you simply just don't have the time to do it. So try to get your list down to a maximum of 3 career paths. And if you feel like you're really having a hard time doing that, then you probably want to spend a little bit more time doing some more research to help you get that list down a little bit more, okay? So definitely keep that in mind as well. Okay, so we've identified our values, we've done our research. Like I mentioned before, that research isn't something that you're going to be able to do in 5 minutes. It is a process. It is going to take time. But once you get through that phase and you've kind of narrowed down some of those career paths, the final R here is refine. So this is where you actually want to try out your interests. And this is another quote from the book that I thought it just really kind of hit home with me as I was reading this book. Just as you can't expect to find a soulmate on the first date, finding work that fulfills you doesn't always happen on the first try either. Understanding what's meaningful to you takes time, and answers may not truly emerge until you've been out in the world testing and experimenting, trying out different options, and challenging yourself at different levels. So really, keep that in mind. You can't expect to just kind of do these exercises and be like, okay, I got it figured out. It is a process. It's something that's going to take time. And again, those answers might change and things may change as you move through your career. So again, keeping that kind of 2 to 5 year time frame in mind once again what's important to you now, what's the right job for you right now. So we really want to be able to give you some opportunities here so you can actually try those different things out. So here are some different ways to try. Now, of course, I know as we're kind of going through this pandemic, sometimes it's a little bit easy to say, oh yeah, just get an internship, right? When there's some companies that are kind of trying to figure out, are they still going to be able to have interns? Are they going to be able to offer remote internships and things like that? So keep this in mind. I definitely understand that we're in the middle of this virus right now, and there's sometimes in certain ways we can only do so much, but definitely keep these things in mind as well for hopefully after we kind of get over this hump and things open up a little bit again as well. So job shadowing. This is one way that can be really beneficial to see how well you think you would like something. So whether it's a day or maybe a few days throughout a week, and being able to actually shadow somebody who's in a job that you feel that you're interested in pursuing as well, just to kind of get a better overall sense of what the actual work environment is like, what their day-to-day is like, and see, is this something that I think I can see myself doing or further pursue. An internship, of course, is going to give you that hands-on experience into a certain field or industry, and again, help answer that question as to whether you really see yourself sticking with that or further pursuing that, or maybe it'll help answer the question if you want to kind of go down a different route instead. Taking a class, immersing yourself in the field. So these are all different things that we can kind of look at now. We can still look at blogs or newsletters, listening to different podcasts, a lot of different companies or professional associations out there. Unfortunately, they're having to cancel their large conferences and events right now, but a lot of places are doing online events instead. So if you're able to kind of find some of those that are related to your fields or industries of interest, try to attend those if you can, or join those webinars if you can, to really immerse yourself in the field more and get that feel for, is this something that's still of interest to me? Taking on a project at a current job. So maybe your current job isn't something that you necessarily want to stick with long term, but is there an additional project that you can take on there that is related more to what you want to do long term? So maybe you're not in an HR job right now, for example, but HR is something you think you might want to pursue. Is there something where you can kind of at least gain a little bit more exposure to the HR area of the company that you work for? So seeing if you can kind of take on a project at a current job or volunteer to do additional work, and that can either be at your job or at an outside agency or organization, again, just to help give yourself a better feel for if you really enjoy that work. Freelance is the same thing, where you're not committing yourself or, you know, diving into something full-time or permanent, but trying to do some freelance work, again, to see if this is something that you think you would want to do full-time or further pursue. So those are all different ways that we can kind of try out the different career paths that we identified that we want to further explore. Okay, so now we have time, plenty of time here for some questions. I do just want to mention we have our contact information posted here for you, so feel free if you do have questions or if you want to set up an appointment with our office. We are still meeting with students right now, just not in person on campus, but we are doing phone appointments or appointments through Zoom. So definitely feel free to contact us. It's an email or phone number listed here if you are interested in setting up a one-on-one appointment. Also keep in mind that we are on social media, so we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at RU Career, so definitely make sure that you follow us, stay connected with us, and see any other upcoming workshops. And then we also have a LinkedIn group called Roosevelt Connect, and that is a group on LinkedIn that's available to students, alumni, faculty, staff, employer partners, anybody who kind of has that Roosevelt connection. So it's also a great networking tool and getting some additional people with that Roosevelt affiliation into your professional network So please feel free to join our LinkedIn group as well. Okay, so I am going to go back here. And please, if you do have questions, feel free to type those into the chat box and I will answer them as they come through.
I wrote a question to you privately, if you could repost the links, because I didn't see any links when I first joined the chat.
Oh yes, definitely. I will do that right now. I'm going to copy and paste those.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I just copied and pasted those. So let me know if anyone is still unable to see those. And I'm just scrolling through here. I don't think I missed any questions at all. But again, please feel free, if you do have questions, to type those into the chat box. All right, guys, well, I will hang around here for another couple minutes or so, just in case anyone is still typing or has any last minute questions. But I do thank you all for joining me today for our career exploration workshop. This is going to be our last workshop for the semester, but we are going to still be offering some workshops online over the summer. So once we have that information available and the schedule finalized, we will definitely be getting that information out to our GPS students, and we'll be posting on social media. So definitely look for that. For those of you who might be graduating, keep in mind that we do invite alumni to attend our workshops as well. And you can still meet with us for appointments, and you're still eligible for all the same services through our office that you would be as a student. So definitely keep that in mind. If you need help, we are here